The morning train cut through the English countryside beneath a sky the color of polished pewter. Smoke streamed from the locomotive and drifted over fields washed silver by recent rain. Inside the first-class carriage, warmth glowed from brass lamps mounted along gleaming walnut walls. Velvet seats, polished wood, and expensive perfume surrounded the passengers, who traveled wrapped in comfort and privilege. Duke Alaric Ashbourne sat near the window, his posture straight despite the long journey. At 36, he possessed the quiet authority that came from birth, responsibility, and years of carrying burdens no one else could see. His dark coat was impeccably tailored, and the Ashbourne crest embroidered upon it marked him as one of the most respected noblemen in England. Yet beneath his composed exterior lingered an old grief that never truly loosened its grip. 2 years had passed since his younger brother Nathaniel vanished in a shipwreck. The world had moved forward. Alaric never had. The train slowed as it approached a small station. Porters hurried along the platform while passengers stepped aboard. Through the window, Alaric barely noticed them until movement near the carriage door drew his attention. A young woman entered. She was heavily pregnant. Rain had darkened the hem of her simple dress, and her modest wool coat looked painfully out of place among the silks and tailored jackets surrounding her. One hand carried a worn leather bag. The other rested protectively over the curve of her stomach. For a moment the carriage fell silent. Then came the looks, the glances, the judgments. The woman searched for an empty seat, but every place was occupied. She remained standing. A noblewoman across the aisle lowered her spectacles and examined her with open disdain. "Surely there has been some mistake," she muttered. Her companion laughed softly. "First class becomes less exclusive every year." Several passengers smiled. The pregnant woman lowered her gaze but said nothing. The train lurched forward again. She grabbed a brass rail for balance. Alaric noticed how pale she looked, how exhausted, how carefully she concealed her discomfort. Another woman leaned closer to her friend. "I wonder whose child she carries." The remark produced quiet amusement. Perhaps she hopes to find a wealthy husband before it arrives. A few passengers chuckled. The young woman stiffened. Color rose briefly in her cheeks. Still she remained silent. Alaric felt something harden inside him. He had spent enough years among the aristocracy to recognize cruelty disguised as refinement. The train rounded a curve. The sudden motion nearly threw the woman off her feet. Before she could stumble, Alaric rose. The movement immediately drew attention. Without a word, he stepped aside from his seat. "My lady," he said gently, "please sit." The woman blinked in surprise. "Oh no, I could never take your place." "You can." "I couldn't possibly. You clearly need it more than I do." A murmur spread through the carriage. Several passengers recognized him immediately. A duke giving up his seat to a stranger was unusual enough. Doing so for a woman many had already dismissed was nearly shocking. The pregnant woman looked overwhelmed. Her eyes glistened. For a second, Alaric feared she might collapse. Finally she accepted. "Thank you," she whispered. He offered his hand to steady her. She lowered herself onto the velvet seat with visible relief. The smallest breath escaped her lips. It sounded almost like pain leaving her body. Alaric moved to stand nearby, gripping an overhead rail. The noblewomen who had mocked her exchanged disapproving looks but wisely remained silent. No one wished to challenge Duke Alaric Ashbourne. The train continued through rolling countryside. Minutes passed. Then an hour. The rhythm of steel wheels echoed beneath the floorboards. Passengers returned to newspapers and conversation. Yet Alaric occasionally noticed the young woman glancing toward him. There was something unusual about her expression. Not admiration. Not curiosity. Recognition. Each time their eyes met, she quickly looked away. At last, while adjusting her coat, her gaze settled on the embroidered crest near his shoulder. The effect was immediate. All color drained from her face. Her hand flew to her mouth. Alaric frowned. The reaction was too strong to ignore. Had they met before? He was certain they had not. The woman stared at the crest as though she had seen a ghost. For several moments she seemed unable to breathe. Then she pressed trembling fingers against the leather bag resting beside her. Whatever rested inside appeared deeply important. The train began slowing once more. Outside, another station emerged through drifting steam. Passengers prepared to depart. Some gathered luggage. Others stretched cramped limbs. The pregnant woman remained motionless. She looked as though she were gathering courage for something difficult. Finally she rose from the seat. Her hand shook. "Your Grace." Alaric turned toward her. The entire carriage seemed suddenly quieter. Yes. She swallowed. May I ask you something? Of course. Her eyes searched his face. Are you Duke Alaric Ashbourne? A strange chill moved through him. I am. The woman closed her eyes. When she opened them again, tears shimmered there. One escaped and traced a path down her cheek. The leather bag slipped slightly from her grasp. For a moment she seemed unable to speak. Then, with a trembling voice that carried through the silent carriage, she whispered the words that shattered the world Alaric thought he knew. Your Grace. Lord Nathaniel Ashbourne was my husband. Every sound vanished. Every breath stopped. And as stunned passengers stared between them, the young woman's hand moved instinctively to her swollen stomach, revealing a truth even more impossible than the first. For several seconds, Duke Alaric Ashbourne could do nothing except stare. The train carriage seemed suspended outside time. The murmur of passengers, the rattling wheels beneath the floor, even the distant whistle of the locomotive faded into a strange silence. Nathaniel. His brother's name had lived inside him like an old wound for 2 years. Now a stranger had spoken it with the intimacy of a wife. Alaric searched the young woman's face for deception and found only exhaustion, grief, and fear. The tears in her eyes were real. So was the tremor in her voice. He glanced toward her rounded stomach, then back at her. What did you say? He asked quietly. The woman lowered her gaze. I said Lord Nathaniel Ashbourne was my husband. The words landed with the weight of a falling stone. Several nearby passengers openly listened now. Alaric noticed and immediately stepped closer. This conversation is not for public ears. He collected her travel bag and gestured toward a private compartment farther down the carriage. The young woman hesitated only briefly before following. Once the door closed behind them, the noise of the train softened. The smaller compartment felt intimate, illuminated by golden lamplight and framed by polished wood panels. Alaric remained standing. He was afraid to sit. Afraid that if he sat, the reality of her claim might become impossible to escape. The woman folded trembling hands in her lap. My name is Seraphina Everly. Alaric nodded slowly. And you claim to have been married to my brother. I do not claim it, she said softly. I lived it. A painful sincerity crossed her features. Alaric felt his certainty begin to fracture. Tell me everything. Seraphina drew a steadying breath. Outside the window, green fields rushed past beneath a gray sky. Her eyes followed them for a moment as though searching the past. I first met Nathaniel 3 years ago. A faint smile touched her lips. It was during a storm near Whitmore Bay. The memory seemed to warm her despite the sorrow surrounding it. My father's fishing boat had not returned. I went searching along the cliffs despite the weather. Her fingers tightened together. The wind was terrible. I slipped on wet stone. Alaric listened silently. I would have fallen into the sea if someone hadn't caught my arm. Her voice softened. It was Nathaniel. For the first time since hearing her revelation, Alaric felt something besides shock. He could imagine it perfectly. Nathaniel had always rushed toward danger while others retreated. The image fit. Seraphina smiled through tears. He laughed afterward because I scolded him for risking his life. A reluctant smile tugged at Alaric's mouth. That fit too. Nathaniel had possessed a reckless charm capable of winning almost anyone. He returned the next day, she continued, and the day after that. The train rocked gently. The rhythm seemed to carry her memories forward. We walked the coastline together. We spoke about books, family, dreams, and places we wished to see. Her expression brightened briefly. With Nathaniel, everything felt easy. Alaric looked away toward the window. For years he had feared memories of his brother might fade. Instead, they returned now with startling clarity. Nathaniel laughing beside fireplaces. Nathaniel climbing trees despite being a grown man. Nathaniel refusing to treat servants differently than nobles. Nathaniel living more boldly than anyone Alaric had ever known. We fell in love, Seraphina said. The simplicity of the statement carried immense weight. She reached into her worn travel bag. Alaric watched carefully. From within, she withdrew a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Her hands treated it with reverence. Inside lay several letters tied with faded ribbon. Atop them rested a gold ring bearing the Ashbourne crest. Alaric's breath caught. He recognized it instantly. Nathaniel's signet ring. Seraphina nodded. He gave it to me on our wedding day. A strange pressure tightened around Alaric's chest. The ring was genuine. No outsider should have possessed it. With careful fingers, she unfolded another document. Age and travel had softened its edges. A church seal remained visible at the bottom. Our marriage certificate. Alaric stared. The signatures were unmistakable. Nathaniel Ashbourne. Seraphina Everly. The date. The witnesses. Everything appeared authentic. His carefully ordered world tilted again. Why did he keep it secret? Alaric asked. Seraphina looked genuinely saddened. He never wished to hide me. The answer came immediately. He feared others would judge me for my birth. A painful silence followed. Both knew exactly what she meant. Many aristocratic families would have opposed such a match. Nathaniel had likely expected resistance. He planned to tell you himself. Those words struck Alaric harder than she realized. He spoke of you constantly. Seraphina smiled faintly. He admired you. Alaric lowered his eyes. He shouldn't have. He did. She opened one of the letters. The night before his final voyage, he wrote about you. Her voice trembled as she read. My brother has carried responsibilities meant for 3 men. One day I hope he allows himself happiness. Alaric swallowed. The compartment suddenly felt too small. Too warm. Nathaniel was speaking across death itself. I never knew he wrote that. He wrote many things. She carefully returned the letter. He intended to come home after that voyage. The smile disappeared. He wanted to introduce me properly. The train entered a tunnel. Darkness briefly swallowed the compartment. When daylight returned, tears filled her eyes. He never came back. Alaric felt grief reopen with fresh cruelty. The shipwreck had haunted newspapers for months. Few survivors had emerged. Nathaniel's body was never recovered. Only absence returned. Seraphina reached once more into the bag. This time she withdrew a weathered envelope. Its seal had long since been broken. A sailor delivered this to me 6 months after the wreck. Alaric stared. The envelope bore Nathaniel's handwriting. He survived longer than we thought, she whispered. He knew rescue would never arrive. Alaric's pulse quickened. What does it say? Seraphina unfolded the letter. Tears slipped down her cheeks. If this reaches you, then God has chosen another path for me. Her voice wavered. Tell my wife that loving her was the greatest blessing of my life. Alaric closed his eyes. The pain was almost unbearable. Find my brother. Tell him I loved him. Tell him none of this was his fault. Silence filled the compartment. Outside, rain began striking the glass. Neither moved. Neither spoke. At last Seraphina pressed the letter against her chest. He died believing I would find you. Alaric stared at the ring, the documents, the evidence of a life his brother had never been allowed to finish. The grief he had contained for 2 years finally broke. A tear escaped before he could stop it. Then another. He bowed his head. For the first time since Nathaniel's death, he openly wept. Seraphina said nothing. She simply allowed him to mourn. The train continued onward through rain and countryside alike. Eventually Alaric straightened. The storm inside him had not passed, but something had changed. Nathaniel had not died alone. He had loved. He had been loved. And he had left behind a family. Alaric carefully picked up the signet ring. Its familiar weight settled into his palm. A final connection to the brother he had lost. Then his gaze shifted toward Seraphina's stomach. Toward the child carrying Nathaniel's blood. His nephew. The realization settled with quiet power. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a certainty that surprised even him. You will come to Ashbourne Manor. Seraphina looked startled. Your Grace. You and the child belong with family. Emotion flooded her face. I don't want charity. This is not charity. Alaric returned the ring to her hand. It is a promise. The train began slowing once more. Through the rain-streaked window, distant towers emerged atop a hill. Ashbourne Manor. Oh. Yet as Seraphina followed his gaze, fear returned to her eyes, because beyond those ancient walls waited an entire world that knew nothing of Nathaniel's secret wife, nothing of his unborn heir, and nothing of the storm their arrival was about to unleash. Ashbourne Manor stood atop a rise overlooking miles of rolling countryside, its gray stone towers rising from the autumn landscape like something carved from history itself. Rain clouds drifted across the horizon as the carriage approached the estate gates. Seraphina sat quietly beside Duke Alaric, her hands folded over her stomach. The closer they came, the tighter her chest felt. She had spent 2 years searching for this place. Now she feared entering it. The iron gates opened. Servants appeared in the courtyard. Stable hands hurried forward. Footmen lined the entrance. Everything reflected wealth, order, and generations of power. Everything reminded Seraphina that she did not belong. The carriage stopped beneath the grand portico. Alaric stepped down first. Then he turned and offered his hand. She accepted. The moment her shoes touched the stone, dozens of eyes settled upon her. Curiosity spread instantly. Questions followed. Who was she? Why had the Duke brought her home? Why was she carrying a child? The whispers began before she reached the front doors. Inside, the manor glowed with warmth. Crystal chandeliers illuminated polished marble floors. Portraits of Ashbourne ancestors watched from gilded frames. Servants bowed respectfully to Alaric, but many glanced toward Seraphina when they thought she wasn't looking. By evening, rumors had already reached every corner of the house. The next morning they spread beyond it. 3 days later, the entire county seemed aware that Duke Alaric Ashbourne had arrived with a pregnant stranger claiming to be the widow of his dead brother. The scandal exploded through society like fire through dry grass. Letters arrived daily. Visitors suddenly found reasons to call. Curiosity disguised itself as concern. Suspicion disguised itself as politeness. No one embodied either more perfectly than Lady Vivian Blackwood. When she first entered Ashbourne Manor after Seraphina's arrival, she appeared the picture of elegance. Her dark blue gown was flawless. Her smile was graceful. Her voice carried all the refinement expected of a future duchess. At least that was what she still hoped to become. For 2 years she had positioned herself beside Alaric. Society largely expected their eventual engagement. Then Seraphina had appeared. Now Vivian viewed her as an obstacle. A dangerous one. During afternoon tea Vivian finally met her. "My dear Lady Seraphina," she said sweetly. Seraphina noticed immediately that she had emphasized the title. Testing it. Questioning it. "I hope you found the manor comfortable. Everyone has been kind." The statement was generous. Perhaps too generous. Vivian smiled. How fortunate. Her eyes briefly drifted toward Seraphina's stomach. Such situations often attract attention. Alaric, seated nearby, looked up sharply. Vivian instantly redirected the conversation. Yet the warning had already been delivered. The battle lines had been drawn. Within days, invitations began arriving for dinners, receptions, and gatherings. Alaric accepted several. He understood exactly what society was doing. The aristocracy wanted to see Seraphina for themselves. They wanted to judge her. One evening, Ashbourne Manor hosted a formal dinner attended by influential nobles from across the region. The dining room shimmered beneath candlelight. Silver gleamed. Crystal sparkled. Conversation flowed politely. At first, Seraphina sat beside Alaric, determined to endure whatever came. She had survived grief, poverty, loneliness, and uncertainty. Surely she could survive gossip. Then Lord Harcourt lifted his wineglass. "I understand your late husband possessed remarkable foresight." The comment sounded harmless. Something in his smile was not. Several guests exchanged knowing glances. Seraphina remained silent. Lord Harcourt continued. "To marry in secret, leave no witnesses of significance, disappear in a shipwreck, and somehow leave behind an heir. Quite extraordinary." Laughter followed. Not loud. Not kind. The sort intended to wound while preserving deniability. Seraphina felt heat creep into her face. Across the table, Vivian lowered her eyes to hide satisfaction. Another guest joined in. "One almost wonders whether the child was expected before the wedding." More laughter. The words struck like blows. Seraphina gripped her napkin beneath the table. Nathaniel's memory deserved better. Alaric's chair scraped sharply against the floor. The sound silenced the room. He rose slowly. No anger showed on his face. That somehow made him more intimidating. "If any person present doubts my brother's honor," he said evenly, "they are welcome to leave this house immediately." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Alaric's gaze swept the table. "If anyone insults Lady Seraphina again, they insult House Ashbourne itself." The silence deepened. Several guests looked away. Lord Harcourt suddenly found his plate fascinating. Dinner continued. But the atmosphere never recovered. For the first time since arriving, Seraphina felt something unexpected. Protection. Not because Alaric pitied her. Because he believed her. The realization warmed a place inside her that had been cold for years. Yet outside the manor walls, the rumors continued growing. Anonymous letters arrived. Some accused her of lying. Others questioned the child's legitimacy. One described her as a gold digger seeking an inheritance. She burned that one without finishing it. The cruelty exhausted her. Not because it targeted her. Because it targeted Nathaniel. Every accusation felt like a stain upon the man she loved. One rainy afternoon, she wandered into the east corridor searching for solitude. Voices drifted from a nearby sitting room. She recognized none of them. Several visiting noblewomen were gathered inside. Seraphina would have continued walking. Then she heard Nathaniel's name. She froze. Honestly, the entire story sounds ridiculous. A woman laughed. Dead men make convenient husbands. Another voice replied. If Lord Nathaniel truly married her, why didn't he tell anyone? Because he didn't. More laughter followed. Someone else spoke. I suspect the Duke knows she's lying. The words pierced deeper than the others. But he cannot admit it publicly now. Seraphina stood motionless. The conversation continued. Mocking. Dismissing. Erasing Nathaniel's life as though it had never mattered. Tears filled her eyes. She turned away before anyone could discover her listening. The rain intensified outside. By nightfall, a storm swept across the countryside. Wind rattled windows. Thunder rolled over distant hills. Seraphina sat alone in her room staring at Nathaniel's letters. The voices echoed endlessly. Dead men make convenient husbands. The words refused to leave her. Eventually she made a decision. A painful one. Perhaps her presence was causing more damage than good. Perhaps Nathaniel's memory would suffer less if she disappeared. Before dawn, she packed her belongings. She left a brief note thanking Alaric for his kindness. Then she quietly departed Ashbourne Manor. The storm still raged. Rain lashed the roads. Her hired carriage disappeared into darkness. Hours later, a servant discovered the note. Alaric read it twice, then a third time. Each reading deepened the same cold sensation in his chest. Without hesitation, he ordered his horse prepared. The storm had transformed roads into rivers of mud. Visibility was poor. Branches littered the countryside. Yet he rode forward. Every mile intensified his fear. He told himself he was protecting Nathaniel's widow. Nothing more. The lie grew less convincing with every passing hour. Near dusk, he found wreckage beside a flooded ditch. A carriage wheel protruded from tangled brush. One horse had broken free. The other stood trembling in the rain. Alaric's pulse lurched. He dismounted immediately. Seraphina. Only the storm answered. Then he heard a faint sound. A voice. He followed it toward the overturned carriage. There, sheltered beneath shattered wood, lay Seraphina. Mud stained her dress. A cut marked her forehead. Rain poured around her. Yet neither her hands nor her attention were focused on her injuries. She was protecting something beneath her coat. Alaric knelt beside her. What are you doing? Her exhausted eyes lifted to his. With trembling fingers, she revealed the bundle she had shielded throughout the crash. Nathaniel's letters. Every page remained dry. Relief flooded her face when she saw him. Then her strength vanished. Before she could collapse completely, Alaric lifted her into his arms. She weighed almost nothing. Thunder echoed across the hills. Rain streamed down both their faces. Yet as he carried her toward safety, a realization struck with startling force. The thought arrived uninvited, unavoidable, and far more dangerous than any storm. Because while Seraphina rested weakly against his chest, clutching his brother's letters, Alaric discovered that the thing he feared losing most was no longer the memory of Nathaniel. It was her. The storm finally loosened its grip on Ashbourne Manor 3 days after Seraphina's accident. Autumn sunlight returned in pale bands across the estate, illuminating wet gardens and glistening stone walls. From the outside, the manor appeared peaceful again. Inside, however, something had shifted. Seraphina recovered in a guest chamber overlooking the eastern lawns. The cut on her forehead was healing, but the deeper wounds remained hidden beneath quiet smiles and careful conversations. She had expected anger after her attempt to leave. Instead, Alaric had shown only concern. He visited daily. Sometimes he brought books, sometimes tea, sometimes nothing at all except his presence. Those silent visits unsettled her more than any argument could have. Nathaniel had once filled every room with sunlight. Alaric filled them with steadiness. The difference frightened her. One afternoon she found him in the library. The vast room stretched beneath a painted ceiling, lined with towering shelves and generations of Ashbourne history. Dust floated through shafts of golden light. Alaric stood beside a table covered with ledgers, journals, and papers recently recovered from Nathaniel's belongings. His expression was troubled. "What is it?" Seraphina asked. He looked up slowly. "I think my brother was hiding something." The words immediately captured her attention. She moved closer. Alaric picked up a weathered journal. I've spent 2 days reviewing Nathaniel's papers. His fingers rested against a page filled with notes. These aren't travel records. Seraphina frowned. What are they? Investigations. The answer hung heavily between them. Alaric opened the journal. Nathaniel's familiar handwriting filled every page. Names, dates, transactions, ship manifests, financial records, detailed observations. The farther Alaric read, the darker his expression became. He wasn't documenting voyages. His voice lowered. He was gathering evidence. Seraphina felt a chill despite the warmth of the room. Evidence of what? Alaric turned several pages. His jaw tightened. Corruption. The single word transformed everything. 4 hours they worked together. Document after document revealed fragments of a disturbing picture. Nathaniel had uncovered a network of wealthy investors secretly manipulating shipping contracts. Cargo was being intentionally misreported. Insurance claims were being falsified. Entire fortunes were being built through deception. The names involved were powerful. Several belonged to aristocrats. Others belonged to influential businessmen. One name appeared more frequently than all the others. Sir Reginald Hawthorne, a shipping magnate with extensive political connections. Seraphina remembered Nathaniel mentioning him once. Only once. At the time she had thought nothing of it. Now she understood why. Nathaniel had suspected him. Alaric unfolded a separate document hidden within the journal. A silence immediately settled over the room. What is it? Seraphina asked. His face had lost all color. It's the inspection report. She stepped beside him. The report detailed structural concerns regarding the vessel Nathaniel had boarded before the disaster. Sections had been deliberately altered. Repairs had been falsified. Safety inspections had been forged. The ship should never have sailed. Seraphina stared. No. Alaric's eyes remained fixed on the page. It wasn't an accident. The word struck like thunder. For 2 years everyone had accepted the shipwreck as a tragedy of nature. The storm. Bad luck. Fate. Now another possibility emerged. Someone had knowingly sent that vessel to sea. Someone had ensured disaster. Nathaniel had discovered the truth. Then he had died. The implications were horrifying. By evening they possessed enough evidence to convince any reasonable person that a conspiracy existed. Yet convincing reasonable people was not the problem. The people involved were powerful. Powerful enough to bury scandals. Powerful enough to destroy reputations. Perhaps powerful enough to kill. That realization changed everything. Alaric immediately increased security around the estate. Additional guards appeared at entrances. Servants received instructions. Important documents were locked inside the manor's secure archive. Still, unease lingered. Someone else might already know what Nathaniel had uncovered. That fear proved justified sooner than expected. 2 nights later, a masked intruder was discovered inside the library. The man escaped before capture. But he left evidence behind. A broken lock, disturbed papers, and footprints leading directly toward Nathaniel's files. The enemy was searching. The enemy knew. From that moment forward, danger became impossible to ignore. A week later, Alaric traveled to London to consult trusted legal advisors. Seraphina accompanied him. The evidence needed protection. The truth needed witnesses. London greeted them with fog and noise. Horse-drawn carriages crowded narrow streets. Gas lamps glowed through drifting mist. The city felt alive. And dangerous. The meeting with the solicitors lasted most of the afternoon. When it ended, Alaric remained behind discussing legal strategy. Seraphina departed early with a maid and carriage waiting nearby. She never reached it. A hand suddenly seized her arm. Another covered her mouth. Shock exploded through her. 2 men emerged from the fog. One grabbed the satchel containing Nathaniel's documents. The other attempted to drag her toward a waiting carriage. Panic surged. She fought fiercely. The papers mattered too much. Nathaniel had died protecting the truth. She would not surrender it now. The struggle intensified. Her attacker cursed. Pedestrians scattered. The city blurred into confusion. Then a familiar voice cut through the chaos. Let her go. Alaric. The sound alone ignited hope. The kidnappers turned. Too late. Alaric reached them with startling speed. Years of riding, fencing, and discipline transformed into controlled fury. The first man fell immediately. The second attempted escape. He barely managed 3 steps. Within moments both attackers were restrained. Authorities arrived shortly afterward. The satchel was recovered. Seraphina stood trembling beside the carriage. Alaric crossed the distance between them. Without thinking, he touched her face. The gesture lasted only seconds. Yet neither moved away. Neither spoke. Something fragile and undeniable passed between them. Relief, fear, affection, all intertwined. The journey back to Ashbourne Manor felt different afterward. Silences no longer seemed awkward. Shared glances lingered longer than before. The distance they had carefully maintained began quietly disappearing. Weeks passed. Evidence accumulated. Witnesses came forward. The conspiracy slowly unraveled. Yet another conflict emerged. One neither legal documents nor courtrooms could resolve. Nathaniel remained present in every room, in every conversation, in every memory they shared. His absence somehow stood between them even while bringing them closer together. One evening, long after the household had retired, Seraphina wandered into the library. Rain tapped softly against tall windows. Hundreds of candles illuminated shelves overflowing with books. The room glowed with golden warmth. Alaric sat alone beside the fireplace. Nathaniel's journal rested open in his lap. He looked up when she entered. For a moment neither spoke. The quiet felt intimate, almost sacred. Seraphina settled into a nearby chair. "I couldn't sleep." "Neither could I." A faint smile appeared, then vanished. The fire crackled softly. Outside, darkness embraced the manor. Inside, memory surrounded them. Alaric studied the journal. "I spent years angry at fate." His voice remained low. "I thought it stole my brother." Seraphina listened. "Now I know people stole him." Emotion tightened his features. "And somehow that feels worse." She understood, because she felt it too. The silence returned, this time gentler. Alaric finally set the journal aside. His eyes lifted toward hers. Something vulnerable appeared there. Something she had never seen before. "There's something I need to tell you." Her heartbeat quickened. The seriousness in his voice left no room for misunderstanding. Alaric rose slowly. The firelight cast warm shadows across his face. Every word seemed difficult. Every breath carefully measured. "My brother loved you." The statement hung between them. Seraphina felt tears forming instantly. "He did." Alaric nodded. "I know." His gaze never left hers. "That's what makes this so impossible." Emotion roughened his voice. For a long moment he seemed unable to continue. Then he finally spoke the truth neither of them had dared acknowledge. "My brother loved you first." A tear slipped down Seraphina's cheek. Alaric stepped closer. "Yet somehow," he whispered, "so do I." The confession shattered every barrier she had built around her heart. Nathaniel's memory surged through her. The life they had dreamed of. The future they had lost. Yet beneath that grief lived another truth. One she had fought desperately to deny. Because somewhere between storms, sorrow, and survival, she had begun falling in love with Alaric too. Tears blurred her vision. Neither reached for the other. Neither knew how. The love between them felt beautiful. And terribly complicated. Then a sudden crash echoed from somewhere beyond the library doors. Both turned sharply. Footsteps thundered through the corridor. A terrified servant burst into the room, pale with fear. "Your Grace," he gasped. "Someone has broken into the archive." The color drained from Alaric's face. Because there was only one reason anyone would risk entering that room. The conspirators had made their move. And this time they were no longer searching for documents. They were coming for the people who possessed them. The alarm spread through Ashbourne Manor within minutes. Guards rushed toward the archive while servants locked doors and extinguished lamps throughout vulnerable corridors. By the time Alaric and Seraphina reached the secure room, the intruders were gone. The damage they left behind was unmistakable. Cabinets stood open. Documents lay scattered across the floor. Broken locks hung uselessly from heavy doors. Yet amid the destruction, one discovery changed everything. They had failed. The most important evidence remained untouched. Days earlier, anticipating another attempt, Alaric had secretly moved Nathaniel's original records to a solicitor's vault in London. The thieves had searched desperately. They had found nothing. For the first time since uncovering the conspiracy, hope outweighed fear. The following weeks became a relentless march toward justice. Lawyers compiled evidence. Witnesses were located. Financial records were verified. The network surrounding Sir Reginald Hawthorne slowly unraveled under scrutiny. Several former associates, fearing prosecution, agreed to testify. Each statement strengthened Nathaniel's case. Each revelation restored another piece of the truth stolen from him. Meanwhile, society watched closely. Rumors still circulated, but they no longer carried the same confidence. Too many facts had begun emerging. Too many powerful names were suddenly nervous. Lady Vivian Blackwood recognized the changing tide before most. Her carefully cultivated influence had begun slipping away. Guests who once sought her company now avoided private conversations. Letters went unanswered. Invitations diminished. Desperation replaced confidence. One afternoon she arrived unexpectedly at Ashbourne Manor. Seraphina encountered her in the winter garden. Snow dusted the glass roof overhead. Bare branches cast delicate shadows across stone pathways. Vivian's beauty remained striking, but bitterness had sharpened her features. "You should leave while you still can," she said quietly. Seraphina studied her. "Why?" "Because when this becomes public, everything will change." "It already has." A flicker of anger crossed Vivian's face. "You think you've won." "I never wanted a battle." The answer seemed to frustrate her more than any insult. 4 years Vivian had viewed life as a competition. She could not understand someone motivated by love rather than ambition. "You destroyed my future." Seraphina shook her head. "The truth did." Neither woman spoke for several moments. Then Vivian turned and walked away. It was the last meaningful conversation they would ever share. The court hearing commenced 3 weeks later. London was wrapped in winter. Snow-lined rooftops. Carriages crowded streets leading toward the courthouse. Inside, the atmosphere crackled with anticipation. Nobles filled galleries. Journalists occupied every available seat. Politicians observed from reserved sections. The scandal had grown too large to ignore. At its center stood Alaric and Seraphina. Nathaniel's memory stood beside them. Though unseen, his presence filled the room. Proceedings began shortly after noon. Witnesses testified. Shipping records were presented. Account books revealed hidden transactions. One by one, pieces of the conspiracy emerged. Sir Reginald Hawthorne initially maintained composure. He denied everything. Then the letters appeared. Nathaniel's letters. The courtroom quieted immediately. Alaric watched as the solicitor carefully unfolded the documents. Every page carried Nathaniel's handwriting. Every word carried his voice. The letters documented fraudulent inspections, bribed officials, threats, hidden partnerships. Most importantly, they identified the individuals responsible. The evidence was devastating. For the first time, Sir Reginald looked afraid. Additional testimony followed. Former employees confirmed the forged repairs. Inspectors admitted accepting payments. Surviving sailors described warnings that had been ignored. The truth accumulated like an unstoppable tide. By late afternoon, resistance collapsed. Several conspirators openly confessed. Others attempted denial only to contradict one another. The courtroom transformed into a public reckoning. Nathaniel's reputation was restored piece by piece. The young man society believed had died in a meaningless tragedy was revealed as something else entirely. A courageous man who had uncovered corruption. A husband. A future father. A victim. When the proceedings finally concluded, judgments were swift. Arrests followed immediately. Titles lost influence. Fortunes evaporated. Several powerful men left the courtroom under guard. Sir Reginald among them. Justice, though delayed, had finally arrived. Outside, snow drifted gently from a gray sky. Crowds gathered near courthouse steps. News spread rapidly through London. For the first time in years, Alaric felt his brother at peace. Yet as relief settled over him, another concern emerged. Seraphina looked pale. Very pale. She had been uncomfortable throughout the afternoon. Now she pressed a hand against her stomach. Concern flashed across Alaric's face. "Are you all right?" She attempted a smile. Before she could answer, pain crossed her features. A sharp breath escaped her. Everything changed instantly. The child was coming. The journey back to Ashbourne Manor became a race against time. Snow intensified. Roads deteriorated. Wind swept across open countryside. By the time they reached the estate, a full storm had descended. The manor became isolated beneath swirling white darkness. Doctors were summoned. Midwives prepared rooms. Servants hurried through corridors carrying blankets, hot water, and supplies. The entire house seemed to hold its breath. Night arrived, then stretched endlessly. Labor proved long and exhausting. Seraphina endured wave after wave of pain with remarkable courage. Alaric refused to leave. Several people suggested he rest. He ignored them all. Hours passed. The storm battered windows. Fireplaces glowed. Clocks marked time that seemed unwilling to move. Sometimes Seraphina cried out. Each sound tightened something inside Alaric. He had faced political scandals, financial crises, and dangerous enemies. None had made him feel as helpless as this. Near midnight, she reached for his hand. Instinctively, he took it. Her grip tightened. He never let go. "You should rest," she whispered weakly. He shook his head. "Not a chance." A faint smile appeared despite her exhaustion. The moment passed quickly. Another contraction arrived. The struggle continued. Outside, snow buried the world. Inside, life fought to arrive. Just before dawn, a newborn cry shattered the darkness. The sound echoed through the room, then through the corridor, then through the entire house. Silence followed. Not fearful silence. Wonder. The doctor smiled. The midwife laughed softly. Relief swept through everyone present. A healthy baby boy had entered the world. Alaric stood motionless. For several seconds he could only stare. The child was tiny. Perfect. Alive. The midwife carefully placed the infant into his arms. Emotion struck with overwhelming force. The baby opened sleepy eyes. Nathaniel's eyes. The resemblance was unmistakable. Alaric's composure finally broke. Tears spilled freely down his face. He looked from the child to Seraphina. Neither attempted to hide their emotions. In that moment, grief and joy existed together. Nathaniel was gone. Yet somehow part of him remained. Weeks later, the storm felt like a distant memory. The Crown formally recognized the child as Nathaniel Ashbourne's legitimate heir. Public opinion transformed almost overnight. The same society that once doubted Seraphina now celebrated her. Nathaniel's honor was fully restored. Ashbourne Manor flourished. Peace returned. Even Lady Vivian disappeared from public life after her involvement in spreading false accusations became widely known. Winter slowly surrendered to spring. Then spring matured into autumn. Golden leaves drifted through manor gardens. The child, named Nathaniel after his father, became the center of every household affection. One afternoon, Seraphina walked beneath amber trees while carrying her son. The estate stretched around her in quiet beauty. She had arrived here alone. Now she belonged. Footsteps approached along the garden path. She turned. Alaric stood there. Nervous. The sight alone made her smile. Dukes rarely appeared nervous. Men in love often did. He stopped before her. For a moment, neither spoke. The autumn wind stirred falling leaves around them. Then Alaric slowly lowered himself onto one knee. Seraphina's breath caught. He looked not like a duke, not like a powerful nobleman, simply like a man offering his heart. "Nathaniel brought us together," he said softly. Emotion thickened his voice. "He gave me one final gift." Tears immediately filled her eyes. Alaric smiled gently. "I loved him as my brother." His gaze shifted toward the child. "I love him as my nephew." Then he looked back at her. "And I love you as the woman I want beside me for the rest of my life." The garden seemed to disappear. Only his voice remained. Only his eyes. Only the future waiting between them. "Will you marry me?" Seraphina cried openly now. Not from sorrow. Not from grief. But from the extraordinary journey that had carried them here. She nodded. Then laughed through tears. Then answered. "Yes." Alaric rose and carefully embraced both her and little Nathaniel. Above them, golden leaves drifted through sunlight. Months later, a grand family portrait hung inside Ashbourne Manor. It showed Duke Alaric Ashbourne, Lady Seraphina, baby Nathaniel, loyal servants, estate workers, and every person who had helped them survive loss, scandal, and heartbreak. Visitors often admired the painting. Most saw a happy family. Few understood its deeper meaning. Because the greatest legacy Nathaniel Ashbourne left behind was never wealth, title, or inheritance. It was the child who carried his name, the woman he loved, the brother he trusted, and the family that tragedy nearly destroyed, but love ultimately saved forever.